Is that it?
I
Okay,
think we're going live.
I believe
Here
so.
we go.
Okay, another live stream Prospero weekly update. A lot to talk about, and I think we're going to start with the biggest of the big this week and go straight for Apple, correct?
Yeah. And sorry these live streams have been so hectic. There's a lot of capital raising going on for Prospero now. So hopefully when we get on the other side, we'll have some pretty cool new things, including some alerts that I think we're going to start to be able to talk about pretty soon. But yes, let's jump into Apple. Which we put on our I guess we can say, we don't share everything necessarily. But we put them on our bonus picks last week because we started to see in the weekly newsletter because we started to see that net option sentiment was going up. And it's still higher than I would say its traditional levels. When I last checked after kind of market open, it was at 70. But I had kind of seen it as high as I've ever seen it at 96. So even just by virtue of, I'd say, more short-term options being played, I would say, a reflection of a few things. I would say that's a reflection of people becoming more bullish on the market overall, even stocks that you might say are like kind of traditionally overpriced. And Apple's kind of at about a 30 forward PE, which is pretty high, but not necessarily as high as it's been. Um, and I would just say people are overall becoming more bullish on especially big tech and all these things that could touch AI, and pretty much anything that is big tech is having some kind of AI play if they didn't already, no matter how much they're playing it up or not playing it up. But yeah, I would say that Apple is, it's starting to get more of those short-term options plays, which might mean that if you want to own it, as it kind of goes up a lot, I would expect in the next 10 years, as kind of FANG and what they're calling like expanded FANG, or I forget, we were talking about what the new name for it was. Um, what? What did you
Magnificent.
say? Oh yeah, the Magnificent Seven. I don't know if that's like I don't know if that's good enough to stick yet. Um, but but yes, I would say that Apple is definitely, even people just say like, oh, buy Vanguard Total Return or buy the S&P 500. But over the last 10 years, FANG and maybe even the Magnificent Seven, I think that would probably continue. I would bet on that over the S&P 500, to be honest, with all of this like generative AI stuff and basically with technology becoming more and more important. I would say that, yeah, like people, I would say I see a lot of older people saying like, oh, you just buy the S&P 500 and it's fine and that's always worked. And the number one thing they teach you, well, this kind of applies to both, but it's the number one, like one of the number one investing lessons is past performance isn't a reflection of future performance. And that pretty much means, to me, it might not be like, I think some maybe less experienced investors might take that to mean just toss out the past, but it means make your own future evaluation. And in my own future evaluation, I would say that these tech companies that are especially well positioned to leverage automation, as well as using that automation to move on to new frontiers, I think is particularly important, and that actually segues pretty well into Apple, I would say, and as a broader company and where the growth areas might be. And everyone kind of puts them in like broad healthcare, kind of, that's the one thing like, oh, we know they want to do something in healthcare, but we're not sure what. But, in terms of segueing into what I said, whereas having like advanced tech and AI and that opening up markets for you, they've got this Apple Watch. We know kind of like something around like fitness or vitals or something makes a lot of sense because they're already capturing all that data. They're already capturing that phone data, and they can certainly, build out more products. And, even something like this VR headset, or what, like, I don't know if they call it VR, or there's too many different names to keep track of. Like they're very like high end reality augmenting headset. That could fit in well with fitness too. That could be an exercise routine. That could there could be a lot of different things along with the vitals that they could build products out of, and custom products, and kind of like the monthly recurring revenue, which is a lot of what these tech companies are now targeting more and building out services for. A lot of people think Apple is going to get into the car business at some point. Apple is obviously you have some of these more interesting, like everybody's got a streaming play now. Google's actually got a larger TV play, and they've got, they actually got that big NFL deal that them and Apple were both competing for. So yeah, I think in terms of why I would bet on Apple or even like any of the tech giants or FANG and the Magnificent Seven, I would say it's not necessarily even everything that their business is today and that they've been able to basically consistently grow those businesses. But it's also just like the more advanced your technology is, the more you can repurpose it to move into other markets. And it's something that Prospero is keenly aware of. Data is the most important thing that allows that. And obviously, all of these big tech companies have good data that allows them to kind of build products that help you and are kind of directed to help you. And I think that where Apple is, that I would say none of the other tech giants are, and I think it speaks to why they're the largest market cap company, is they have that really excellent design and they have that design focus, whereas people will pay more for an Apple product because they are intuitive. They are something that has become, like, I would say, almost like a status symbol for some people. But I would say personally, like, I buy iPhones because I think they look nice and I like the functionality of it. I mean, some people like will defend their Google phone to the death. But I don't know, when I try them or when I look at it or when I look at different products, it's just not as intuitive to me as Apple.
And I think what Apple does better than any other company is their products work so well, like interchangeably. So like the laptop connects with the phone, which connects with the AirPods, which connects with the watch, and now they're gonna have a car. And it's like once they get you on one product, you have to get more because they work so well together.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think that it's definitely something that they do better than anyone else, and they just kind of get you in their ecosystem, and then it's just like very easy to upsell you and kind of keep sticking with those kinds of products, I would say. But yeah, should we segue into like the people that could unseat? I don't know where you want to go next, but I
Yeah,
think that's a good transition.
I think that's an interesting question because, as we've seen in the history of the stock market, no company has stayed the biggest in the world for a long period of time. I mean, they could be decades, but in the long run, they've never been able to maintain that number one spot. So I think it's going to be interesting what companies you see as being possible to pass Apple.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that this is not gonna. I know you wanted some more exciting names, but I kind of look at the largest market cap companies in the world, and like I would say, like, I think it's like 5, 7, and 8 or something like that. I think Amazon is something that we talk about a lot here. As just like, yeah, I think they're gonna keep growing. They're the best at building new products and moving into new businesses because, like, that was what Jeff Bezos did anyone better than anyone else. He figured out how to put the customer first, and then he figured out how to like move in an organized way into new markets and kind of just like take them over. So that's the obvious one. Then, I thought the nice segue was Tesla, because like I think what's going on with them is like they have the really good design aesthetics of Apple in the same way, and they kind of have that same like status symbol, like everything's like sleek, and you get like not only does it look nice, but you get in and everything kind of works the way you expect it to. But they're moving on, I would say, much more aggressively into frontier tech. And the thing that we always say with Tesla too is like not only frontier tech, like their batteries can be huge. A lot of people are talking about how the Tesla robot is going to be something that is their big exciting next product. Like I personally think they're going to make inroads into the power grid. A lot of where they are now, and like a lot of the big battery technology, and I would say kind of what differentiates them versus Apple, and why I would say, oh, I might bet on them is to be the largest, is because Elon Musk is just so good at the lobbying. And he could get something like these like large power grid contracts and large like maybe international power grid contracts to just redo it based on how well he plays that game. And obviously we talk about how he got that agreement where he could sell direct to consumer with cars, and that has been like car dealerships have had like those entrenched with the governments. Like that was a big barrier for him to be able to break. So yeah, I would say that that's like one of the many things that kind of makes him unique. And then even just looking at it from an AI perspective, like all the rest of the cars use LiDAR on top of them, and it's only his car that has like a good enough like machine learning algorithm and AI tech to apply it. that they don't need LiDAR. They just basically have pre-trained models that, actually in a lot of ways make the cars safer, because, in terms of like a pre-trained model that's just getting applied, like if it's built well, that's a lot easier and lighter to run. Whereas like the heavier the actual hardware that you have to run and the more moving parts, the like larger the chance it could malfunction, the larger the chance that you're kind of dependent on data that is not pre-trained, versus like, when you have a LiDAR thing, you're kind of depending on live inputs. And that also leaves more room for potential error handling problems as well. So Tesla's that, Nvidia's the obviously the one of the obvious ones, but I think we want to talk about that less. So maybe we'll the next. So we'll maybe segue to that a little better. But I'll say like my big dark horse, and I'd say is like a lot of this is like political, but Taiwan Semi is one that it's just like, well, I don't even know if it would be called Taiwan Semi. But let's go through this exercise. Let's say China takes over Taiwan, and they make it some like larger semiconductor, play that is like they're all of a sudden like ramping up the exports. They're doing a lot that could easily be the largest company in the world. The other side to that is like what we saw with Alibaba. It's getting broken up. Maybe China takes over and doesn't want it to become the largest company in the world, wants to break it up. So, there's kind of that binary outcome if China does take over Taiwan Semi. But then there's the other side to where, I mean, maybe there's deals that could happen that end up securing the security of Taiwan. It doesn't get taken over, and that enables it to grow more, because maybe one of the reasons, I could even see a reason that they, that they don't grow more is that there's concern if they're more capitalized, if they enter too market, if they become too big, that's almost makes them a more attractive invasion target for China, especially if a lot of that is like kind of benefiting foreign countries as they see. So yeah, there's a lot of complexity there, but there's certainly outcomes where Taiwan Semi could become the biggest largest market cap company in the world. But yeah, let's Nvidia is another one. But I don't know if there's kind of some prompts that you wanted to do, and I can kind of mention the bull case as well as what we're seeing now.
Yeah, before we get into Nvidia, I just wanted to butt in with a little lighthearted topic before we move on. And just the Mark Zuckerberg versus Elon Musk thing has been taking the world by storm over the past week, and it actually looks like it could happen. Like it's not even a joke. Like I've seen Dana White talk about it, and Elon and Zuckerberg are going back and forth on Twitter. So first, if that were to happen, does the stocks or do the stocks get affected at all in any way, or is it just all like a fun and games show?
Well, let's go with the following things. The first thing is like, I think this must have been like, I do think there's a good chance that it can happen, because like all this like fighting training that Zuckerberg has been doing, like it's hard to not see those as connected. And I don't know if they've just been like trash talking, and like Zuckerberg is like getting to like a critical mass of fighting strength where he's like, okay, like I'm gonna do this. So yeah, obviously this has been brewing. Then we also have like the aspect of it that like, all right, there's a lot of layers to it.
Well, you
I
also
mean,
have
I
the
would say
cookie
like,
winner too.
yeah, we'll get there. So I would say that that the next part of it is, kind of how I think about this is basically that I'm annoyed that they keep on like trying to get all of this attention, and I'm just like, oh god, another thing, like both of them. I'm just like, actually it's more Musk. I like Zuckerberg annoys me for different reasons, but I'm annoyed that they're like making this a story and he got like sucked into like Musk's ego game basically. But yeah, I would say that it's must watch. I'm very excited to watch it. As annoyed as I am that they're getting this attention, like it's a win no matter what. Like seeing one of them get beaten up, or hopefully both of them. Like, and I don't have any personal animus towards them. I just feel like they both could be used to take it down a few pegs. And like I feel like it's all fun and games, and it's all like an ego boost until one of them is gonna get their butt kicked. And I think they're both kind of like they've done so much winning in their lives. They both probably think it's like impossible that they lose. But someone's gonna lose, or maybe both of them. That would be the best outcome if they like both like kick each other's butts and somebody wins, but it's a bad look for both of them. That's the dream scenario. Um, in terms of like, I only think like getting your name in the paper, like all that, or in the news or whatever we want to call it, media, like that can only help you. It's going to help both of them. So yeah, I definitely feel like that's the case. I do like stocks are about feelings, and I definitely could see like it's terrible that I am going to indulge this, but yeah, I think the winner's stock could go up, like just because it's
That's
like,
crazy.
I think it's like I'm not even going to say it's because I think people will like doubt the loser more. I just think it's more like whoever wins, it's like, a notch on their belt as like a tech titan and like determination, like because in terms of the winner, I mean, I gotta say Musk. Like, and it's just like I was actually like listening. I was on like a Tesla, like a Wolf Financial space where the guy that was the biographer of Steve Jobs showed up and was talking about it and answered a bunch of questions. It was great. And you saw why it was good for him because a bunch of people were like, I bought your book, like live. Um, and and the one thing he did say that really resonated with me was he was just like, yeah, like Elon Musk like works all the time. And like you kind of heard about it, but like personally, like I think there's like a thing that I call like with a CEO of like building the legend. And then there's that, and then there's like what actually happens. And like I've almost always like found like the more you find out and the more you like talk to people that know that, there's a lot more legend building than actual like, reality. And I will tell you a funny story about Steve Jobs after this because it reminds me of like just like these differences in entrepreneurs. Um, but yeah, like he just seems to have like another like in terms of what this biographer said, like he was up they'd be working until like 3 a.m, and then Elon Musk would want to go out, and this guy was doing his best to shadow him, and they were like, could you keep up with him the whole time? And that's what he said. He was like, no, sometimes he wants to go out at 3 a.m, and I'm just like, after working the whole day, I'm just like, no, I'm going to sleep, that's all you. So yeah, I do think that like Elon Musk does seem to have like another kind of you know gear that like even someone that talked like knew Steve Jobs well and like wrote his autobiography said beyond that. And I don't think like Zuckerberg seems like, he obviously doesn't emote very well, and he doesn't, but I think he's just like, I think he's actually just like very good at his job. And I don't necessarily think he works as hard as Musk does. Not to say he doesn't work hard, but Musk seems to be like its whole life, it's all he wants to do is just starting these companies. If you look, even by virtue of like, Zuckerberg's just got this one thing, like versus like Musk that seemingly wants to like start a company, he's putting out all this IP. I don't think he could turn it off. And to that end, that's why I would like have him winning. But like, the flip side is like, I would not, I'm like not super confident in that answer. Like I wouldn't rule out Zuckerberg because like, one of the things that he has achieved so much, and I do think he's put less effort in than like Elon Musk. So what if he like, what if he focuses on this? Like he clearly like is able to achieve most of the things he puts his mind to and has already gotten started on his fighting. So yeah, I think it's going to be an amazing. I'm very excited to watch it / hate that it's happening, but it's going to be great to watch. Um, and I'll tell you the job story now that I always thought was like very interesting because you only hear, and this is like kind of what I'm talking about in terms of building a legend. And I have been, anyone that has never watched like Steve Jobs' graduation speech at Stanford, it's like one of my favorite things to watch. When my cousin went to college this past year, he's my mom's half brother, daughter. I sent her the speech and she was like, oh my God, this is great. And I think it's like a really, really good thing for anyone to just remind themselves of. But, we tend to get a lot of this, like Steve Jobs is a genius, like he's like a creative, like, and all that is true, I'm sure. But there's a funny story about when he interviewed to be the Secretary of the Treasury. And all of these people like kept on being like, they interviewed him, they did the due diligence on him, and they just be like, oh, like Steve Jobs is great, he's inspirational, blah, blah, blah. And then a few of them would just be like, well, as long as he's getting his way. And like they all kind of said a very similar thing. And then like, finally, and they like just like defended him like to the death, and it was like, no, like didn't really want to talk about what happened if they didn't get his way, but they finally like got it like out of I think it doesn't even know who like spilled the beans on it. Because yeah, we finally got it out of someone, and apparently he just had like a terrible temper, like, and he would just like rail on people when he wouldn't get his way. And I think Elon Musk might be like of a similar vein, but like, but that is all to say, like, we tend to just like have these like good qualities of these people already built up, and that's part of like the building the legend part that I'm talking about. We don't tend to hear about their negative qualities very much. Like I was studying Steve Jobs and like reading about him for a long time before I like stumbled upon that story. And not a lot of people know that story necessarily, or that he actually didn't get a job that he was trying to go for. This is when he was like ousted, in between when he was like ousted at Apple the first time, to when he went back. And yeah, he was like a creative genius, but also like a very difficult person to deal with. And I think it's important, for everybody to kind of look at, especially if you're kind of placing these people like above you, they're human too.
Yeah, we're all people at the end of the day. I will say I will go against you on your pick. So you have Musk, I have Zuckerberg. So when it happens, we'll talk about it then. But yeah, I think it's interesting. And Dana White said he thinks that it could do $1 billion in pay-per-view. So that would blow the pay-per-view record, like it would never be beaten ever.
I hope. Well, why wouldn't they just like broadcast it for free? I hope it's going to like charity or something.
Oh no,
And why are like,
it didn't go on a charity. It is.
well, it's not all going to charity if like pay-per-view is like taking probably like what is their cut? I'm sure it's like
True.
30 or
True.
40%.
True. Yeah,
Maybe
we'll see
they
what
should just
happens.
like, they have tech. Why don't they just like set it up themselves, set up a
It'll
live stream
probably
and
just
have
be
like,
like the purse for Musk and Zuckerberg. That might just be charity, and the pay-per-view, we'll see. But yeah, it's an interesting topic, and I'm sure we'll come back to it. I'm sure there'll be updates. But if we want to get more into Nvidia, which we kind of skipped over, but talk more in depth about what they have going on.
I mean, Nvidia is like obviously, I feel like Nvidia is like a classic example of like maybe some people being late to the party. Like Prospero like loved Nvidia, and like it was like big in our signals for a while, but like I would say a lot of the options like trades of like especially the long-term ones have traded out of it if you look at it. But it's been going up in like profitability and growth. Like I think it's like a 74 for profitability and a 73 for growth, which is very, very high to be that profitable and still growing that much on our scale. So that tells a story of like, especially as they're revising these updates, that tells a pretty bullish story, even though there's not these aggressive long-term options bets being made. And some of that could be because they're not playing options long-term. They're playing it short-term, and they're just like very like, some of these things are interwoven, and why you have to like look at it completely. And it's still pretty high in net option sentiment. And it's like touching near the top of our scales like pretty frequently. But like, yeah, I mean, there's talk of like some of these like custom, more custom chips like Supermicro, which we talk about a lot, eating into the long-term market share. There's talk of kind of more processor based algorithms. Like right now it's very GPU based. Like they are moving along, and Nvidia especially has things that can make even like I would say database operations optimized to GPUs, which is something pretty new. And something that could like kind of completely overshadow like even if processor based optimizations for say deep learning are improved upon. But yeah, like Nvidia is a company that obviously these demand for chips, demand for GPUs, like and really like what's amazing about them is it's like they don't even make the chips. They like they're more chip designers than chip manufacturers, and maybe like that's one of the things that could really grow their business. And obviously like the chips bill is going to make it easier to have these like homegrown factories, and it's interesting to see if maybe even they buy up a smaller company to like build up more manufacturing than them, maybe even I don't even know about the economics of this, but maybe even look to buy something like Supermicro. That is actually something that like would have them behaving more like a large company that could really like that is the kind of acquisition that could make them the largest market cap company. And it would be interesting to see if they start behaving like that, because to this point, like you see like even a company like Meta, Tesla, bought up what was it, Solar City, which was a pretty big company at the time of the acquisition. Meta obviously bought Instagram, but like Nvidia has not, for a company that's like playing in that same like market cap range of them, they haven't necessarily like bought up competition in the same way. And if they start doing that more, that's the kind of thing that could make them grow. But also you have to look at it. Apple, that's not really how Apple grew. Apple grew with a similar thing to them. And it even parallels the design. Apple was more about design than manufacturing. Like obviously, like, what is it? Foxconn, like famously, like Foxconn makes so much of like Apple's products. And similarly, Nvidia is also very focused on design. So it could just be, you could see like Nvidia is kind of like for chips what Apple was for, personal computers, personal hardware. But like, yeah, and to that extent, like obviously it's Nvidia's business is going to touch every business, and they could certainly get there. But it's one of those things that they own so much market share. I think it's over 80% of like the high performance computing chips. It's just like part of it is like, have they been really challenged? Like as this grows, like, when we see them get really challenged on this, especially because like design is something that like at any point someone could start designing chips better. Like obviously all their IP, is very helpful to that. And the staff that they already have, they're well positioned to do that. But we haven't really seen them like take on a threat, that well yet, in the same way that like, I think Apple, like everybody was like, oh, these Samsung phones are going to take over, like, even recently. And we've seen that so many times where we say like, oh, like we were worried about Apple's business, and they just like keep on weathering that, which is why, by the way, they're the number one market cap company, because nobody like prices that in anymore. They're just like expecting Apple to like hold their markets, grow into new markets. But yeah, like, and that's the thing. It's like, that's where Nvidia is. It's like, yeah, Nvidia hasn't really been threatened because they're so good at what they do. And how easy it is to just like price that in, I'd say people are pricing that in. So there's kind of like a big divergence there, where if they find more new markets to get into, if they figure out how to like maybe start acquiring other companies, they could really see even more hyper growth. But there's definitely another story with them where I am kind of concerned about, especially when I see something like upside breakout not being that high, indicating like a lot of long-term bets, more bull bets than bear. Like that's the kind of thing where I'm just like, hey, maybe the market is like they're playing this, but they're a little worried about how well Nvidia can continue to like secure this much market share to project profitability and growth as aggressively as they are.
Well, you mentioned Nvidia's trying to acquire another company, and I'm wondering if that would even be allowed, because we've seen with Microsoft and Activision how it's being held up and it's being challenged in courts. And as you mentioned, Nvidia has an over 80% market share of the things they do. So do you think they'd even be allowed to acquire a company?
I don't know. It's the kind of thing that it's just like, well, like why was like Meta like the regulators, like, they pick and choose these things, right? Because like Meta acquired like WhatsApp, and they acquired Instagram, and like, yeah, I mean, they did that all before like TikTok was big, and that was just like they were just basically like controlling a large swath of like non-cell communication, like cell phone communication. And like, yeah, I guess Snapchat was coming on too, but that was also kind of after Instagram. So like, yeah, and they have obviously like major market share in that as well. So yeah, it's like one of those things where you never know where regulators are going to come in. And I would say the other huge thing with Nvidia, and why I don't think they'd interfere, is like back to Taiwan Semi. Like they're so big in the semiconductor space, and obviously there's not like a complete direct overlap, and obviously like they do business together. But yeah, I would also say that like even this like chips bill, like all this like, oh, we want to make like American made stuff, like I'm not sure the regulators would mess with Nvidia when they're like our big chip darling. Like if anything, I think they might make it easier for them. I can't see them throwing up any barriers.
Yeah, you mentioned Meta. I feel like Meta almost ruined it for all the other companies out there, because they did so much acquiring so quickly and it worked out. They were really good at it. And now I feel like the regulators are much stricter. Like today than they were even just a few years ago.
It's so like it's one of those things where it's just like Amazon is like, I mean, actually, let me shift gears. Google is like the biggest monopoly we've ever seen, like in terms of like how important search is and how much they control it. And like that is like the kind of thing you're supposed to traditionally break up. Like I wouldn't be surprised if like when they broke up like into the Baby Bells, when they broke up like AT&T into the Baby Bells, I wouldn't be surprised if that actually had less of like the phone market share or like telecom than Google had of search. So like it's one of these things where it's just like the US has these laws that they like choose to, and I went to Google first, but like Amazon is like such a traditional monopoly. And it's actually doing a lot of things that like Standard Oil like got like busted up for in terms of like I would say probably both aspects of vertical and horizontal integration. Like I would say the one thing they have going for them is that they do have all of these like affiliates. But in terms of just like since they don't own everything, but in terms of like the control that they have and like the pricing control that they have on goods, there's a lot of like and the number of businesses they span and they want to get into like healthcare now, and they've obviously started doing like prescriptions and like that like a lot of these things have all the traditional marks of monopoly already. So it's just a question of like, who knows what they're actually going to choose to regulate. Like, and I don't think it was Meta that ruined anything. I think it was just like, it's just like, they don't know what they want to regulate. And I think it's just a question of, I think when it comes up is like, I hate to say it, but it's probably like some senator or whatever like didn't want, like they had business interests that made that not want to go through, and then it ends up getting held up. Like I
Mhm.
think that's unfortunately how some of these things work, and it's not always like, because if they were applying the laws strictly or like actually as they were intended, like Google's a monopoly, like, and
So
has been like
do you think
maybe now
Google?
they're more of a threat to that than ever, like with ChatGPT, but like Google has been a huge monopoly for many years and nobody cared.
So do you think Google or Amazon or any of these companies are actually gonna get split up? Is it a matter of time, or is it they just keep lobbying and
I think they're going to keep lobbying, but I think there might be like like, and I say this all the time when I'm just like, when I'm talking to like out of touch wealthy people, like, and I'm just like messing with them a little, but it's true. Like they just say like some really insensitive thing. And I'm just like, well, there's always the guillotines. And like, I'm being glib, but I'm also just saying like, no, like if you just like take enough from people and they don't have enough and they see you have too much, like then they fight back. And like one of the things I actually like mean by like the guillotines is like, and why I think that it's like important to just like give people a political voice that a lot of people don't even have, or like right now or feel that they don't have, is like I think we could get someone like way worse in terms of socialism or whatever than Bernie Sanders, and people are just like, oh, like he would ruin everything and he'd never get anything done and all this stuff. And I hear that, but it's just like, if you piss people off, we might have someone that just comes and like breaks up everything. And basically, like, enough people vote, enough people are sick of it that they just like completely change the capitalist structure
Mhm.
someday. And I do think that's a legitimate possibility. And all those companies get broken up if the overall system doesn't do a better job of like taking care of everybody and like basically not increasing the wealth gap. And
Mhm.
one of the things that we've talked about a bit, which is just like, if technology is going to like take more and more jobs and AI is going to be more and more automated and be like more and more of like a revenue generating system, and it's going to take away from, even like if you think of like, truck drivers are a huge employment, and like, fast food and like things like, those kind of jobs, if they disappear and we don't do a better job of like figuring out how to like remake this economy, or even like figuring out how to get something like healthcare for everybody, like it's going to be pretty disastrous for like what might actually happen. Yeah, like the way people fight back against that, and like whether it's an actual revolution or whether it's like, just like fighting back politically, traditionally people like way overshoot and way overcorrect. And like, yeah, I could definitely see an outcome in that scenario where like a bunch of people get elected to just like break up all of the large capitalist enterprises.
All right, well, we got kind of sidetracked, and now I'm going to ask you if these if these companies are about to get stronger. But I had one other question about Nvidia, which was, is a threat to them that these big tech companies are going to make their own chips? Because I know Apple starts to make their own chips, and they're doing like a really good job with it. And I don't know if Google, Microsoft, all these other ones are, but I'm sure they're capable. So could that happen, and then Nvidia loses out?
Yeah, I think Meta is also working on making its own chips. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, because I think what people are like, one of like the smartest people I know in AI, like, and he works at the partnership on AI. He like works for a company called Sentient. And like, I'm a pretty smart guy. I can barely understand what they do. They make like, he's like an AI engineer, but he works on making like I want to say like algorithms within the hardware or like engineering of the hardware around algorithms. Like I can't even completely wrap my head around what they do. But like that is to say, like what I do understand is like you can build, custom chips around these, applications. That is just like, okay, like, yeah, your database operations are specific. Like, the more you're doing repetitive tasks, the more you absolutely, even if they're like deep learning repetitive tasks that have like a certain GPU, like the more you're customizing like the whole motherboard or the whole like server stack, like not just like that, just be like, okay, we need this server element that's like these 8 GPUs, this RAM, like to work this process. Like I would say, obviously, the more you have kind of optimized around that exact thing, and even like started to do kind of that thing where you're building, whether it's low level code or whether it's specific hardware elements to interact with that low level code. And when I say like low level code for those that don't understand, that's like you have code in like Python, let's just say, that runs like algorithms. But then you can actually have like the code below that like takes it and like puts it onto certain like processors. And Python like has that like generalized, but you can actually go like a level down that is like specifically sending it to GPUs efficiently. And that's actually what like a lot of what NVIDIA has done and made that easier to do, which is why I think, one of the many reasons why their chips are so popular, because they work a lot with developers to make that better. But like, yeah, like that's just a like even that statement right there. Like they're working with different developers to make their generalized chips better. Like that process, like could be a lot more customized for these businesses. And they might find, yeah, especially as they do and they run more and more compute, that it becomes a more and more compelling case to have these custom chips.
Really interesting stuff. I think it's time to switch it up and go to a little bit more macro stuff. So do you want to talk about how the rally seems to be broadening, and if that's what the bulls need at this point to happen in the market?
Did Rodney? I mean, what's going on in the market today? Am I missing something? Like,
I don't know about just today, but it seems like the
no,
Dow.
last week was the first. Yeah, last week was the first red week.
Yeah,
Um, in uh, in 6 weeks for the SPY. And the QQQ was down too. So yeah, I mean, I would say like actually what I think we're seeing is a bit of a correction. How big of a correction, I don't know. I think part of that, and I talked about this in the newsletter this week, is like I think, and I want to actually pull up the exact numbers here, because it is definitely, I don't want to miss. Well, I'm just going to pull up whatever the most current Fed watch is. Okay, so right now, let's check the live probabilities. Yeah, like even yesterday, like for the next meeting and the next 3 meetings, it was like maybe like lower to mid 70s, and then below there was no number above 80. And now like for 920, there's an 80, like close to an 81% chance, and for 11/1, close to an 83% chance that there's a hike. In addition to the next one, like with it's like close to 77. Those rate increases are like a big deal in terms of like how like that the market is getting more and more sure. I think those numbers were in the 60s, even on the 11th when the last time I checked that. So yeah, I mean, I think people are like, I think there was so much exuberance around this AI thing that people were like, oh, like the macro doesn't matter. And we've been talking about that a little bit. But I think there's like some macro realities that are setting back in, which is like some of the things that we talked about too, which is like also Powell has to like work around all these things. Like the more, we talked about corporate profits being a big part of like what's driven this inflationary cycle. And what we're also talking about is like, high levels of employment, especially like skilled worker employment, is something that could like keep prices up. Well, even if like kind of we saw the supply side fixed, like the demand side will stay increased, and we are seeing core inflation kind of being like stickier higher. And so like, yeah, that is definitely, I think, what we're seeing a lot more of. That it's just like, as I've definitely put it, like I do think tech over the next year, like I could definitely see QQQ being green and SPY being red, which essentially like a lot of the same things are in QQQ and SPY, which basically means that like, yeah, the non-tech stuff in the SPY, the S&P 500 is basically like lagging. I could definitely see that being the case. But like, yeah, this week is important to watch, and like people should just check net option sentiment on SPY and QQQ, because we have seen that bit of a divergence again, and we are seeing SPY net option sentiment head back down to 0 again. I think it was like 5 to end the week. So yeah, that's a pretty important thing. And like, yeah, I definitely think we're seeing like this rally deflate a little bit, but like the question is it, just a correction and then we're going to go back up big and this is a buying opportunity, or it's going to be like a bit of a, we saw a pretty good, fairly extended, like 20% rally. Like, sometimes it's back down 10% before it's, off to the races again. So I think people need to be mindful of that. And like, yeah, like I'm saying, like, I do still think this is a great time to buy growth stocks. And we have some recommended in our model portfolio, but like, yeah, I think that like, it's very hard to time the bottom on the growth stuff. But like, yeah, is this the time to just own the S&P 500 if that's not typically what you do? I don't know. I'd rather own the QQQ.
So if the Fed has to raise rates 2 more times, what happens for the rest of the year?
Um, I think if they're raising rates 2 more times, I think we're definitely seeing a red rest of the year for SPY.
So we've peaked already.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But we'll kind of see how that shakes out. Like part of this is like we have to see, some of these earnings projections. We have to see like, I think a big part of it is like, and I was reading like one of the most bullish Deutsche Bank analysts that was like most bullish on this year, and he's calling like 4,500 by the end of the year. And like one of the things that he says is that he's not really seeing like spending reduce, and that's a big thing. He saw people like tightening up their spending, and he's not seeing that, and like working capital adjustments and things like that. So I do think that's important. And, the main thing that I saw, and like the main thing that I'd be watching, especially for the next reporting, is ad revenues. Like we definitely started seeing those ad revenues come down, as kind of the full extent of the earnings impact was being felt. So I think we definitely have to watch that part, and we have to watch the next thing. But like right now, yeah, I would definitely lean to like, on, especially if you're telling me like for sure two rate raises, I definitely think we'll see a red SPY from here on out.
Mhm.
Not necessarily the whole year. I don't know. Like I'd have to look at it, like not the year on the whole, but just definitely from like lower than what it is now.
Mhm. And could you see any scenario where it got bad enough where the market would revisit the October lows?
No, I don't think so.
Okay,
No.
so would that mean that we're in technically a new bull market then?
We already are officially. Yeah. Like I think this tech stuff is just too strong. And like the big, like at the end of the day, these companies are like these big companies. And like, if they're forecasting growth for the big companies, there's all these other like feeder companies, like Confluent is one of the ones that we talked about, where just like that's just one example because of something that we talked about. It's like real-time data processing. And if they're growing, like Nvidia is going to grow. And if it's just like, or sorry, if like Google or is growing, Nvidia is going to grow. We're on this like high process things and like these real-time data processors, and it's just like it's all very connected. And it's just hard to see like, yeah, like things like financial companies could be lagging. Things like we've seen some uncertainty in the oil markets, or even there's things like that where just like, hey, no promises. Like especially if consumer spending is down, that could really hurt the demand side for some of these things. But I think tech where it is now is enough to, carry it. And like that is to say, I could see corrections from these prices on ones that have run a lot, like Nvidia. Like I could easily see a correction down from here to end the year. But like I would say, all those support businesses that people that they might not be raising their guidance too much because they basically have to see like how other companies are spending more or how like demand is increasing around like something like real-time computing for like a little bit as like more of these tech applications are built out as they are now, more advanced tech applications. Like that's why I like something like Confluent, because I think that like we're not even seeing the impact of them boosting their future revenue projections yet, because those orders are still kind of coming in for their database.
Hmm. And we didn't talk about this before, but I don't know if you want to talk about any of the geopolitics at all that are going on recently, how that could affect the market.
Oh, like Russia and
Yeah, like it seems like it's kind of becoming unpopular and it might end soon, it looks like. So how would that affect things?
yeah, yeah. I mean, well, I mean, I think it's one of those things that like if it ends, like yeah, I think the markets will rally if there's like an official ceasefire, no question. But until like it's over, there's also just like this uncertainty around Putin doing something crazy, and I think the markets are going to be like very hesitant because like yeah, like someone like Putin with like all the power that he has is like not going to go down easy. Uh, and like whether that's like you know just doing some crazy stuff where he's like taking a bunch of people in his own country down with him, or is he's like trying to launch a nuclear weapon at someone, like who knows. And I think that it's just like there's gonna, as much as it's like, as much as we all say like, oh, like it's calming down, like I still think like the right way to play it is there's like risk, it's coming down, but there's still like risk on both sides. And like ultimately I don't think he'll do something that crazy, but what I am saying is I think the market is pricing in that uncertainty.
Over.
And we'll see a lot of green, I think, if there's an official ceasefire. And I think we will see a ton, like even more green, if somehow that result is him like, passing it on to someone else. Now, I don't know Russian politics so well to like odds make, because there could be someone crazier. So I'm just going to say like, okay, that's probably likely. Him stepping down is like something that is good. Because I think it's hard to imagine getting like more extreme and totalitarian than him, but that hasn't stopped anyone before.
Hmm.
Um, but I do think that like that does look like, knock on wood, that it's going in a good direction, and that does get resolved without like the caveats of like someone way crazier than him like being in charge, or him doing something crazy on the way out. Then yeah, I do think it's going to be very helpful for the markets.
That's good
And
to
I
hear.
also think that like the other thing that I think is like that war ending is also that's a good sign for China not attacking Taiwan, because I think that like I think that they'd be more opportunistic with that. With like we're a little distracted, we're already like supporting Ukraine, obviously, and a lot of people are supporting Ukraine. I think they'd be a lot more worried about making a move um, if that other war wasn't going on.
That should
Um,
also help inflation come down too, right?
how so?
I don't know. Isn't war inflationary? That's just what I've heard.
Um, if you're like war is inflationary like traditionally on like a historical perspective, if you're basically like printing money to
Mhm.
finance the war. Um, but yeah, I would say that there's some aid going, but we're like not really involved enough in this war. Like it's a line item on our like, what is it like, how big is our like Pentagon budget? Like, yeah, like a nauseating amount.
Well, we're
Um,
like 32 trillion in debt, so.
yeah, yeah, it's like an exactly. So it's like I think what is it like? I think we gave like 6 billion to the Ukraine or something like that. It's like a rounding. It's like
Yeah,
a
I think
rounding error.
we lost a couple billion this year too somehow, so.
No, we lost close to it. Like the Pentagon, I don't even want to get started on that. We lost like a couple trillion in the Pentagon, like, but that's over like a larger time scale. It's crazy. But yeah, it's like that's a negligible cost. I'm sure Ukraine has inflation, like whatever government is like doing right. If they even have, like, I don't know how much commerce there, like, but I'm sure they have
Well, what
inflation.
about the
And I
oil
would bet
market?
Russia has inflation too. What?
Wouldn't the price of oil drop if countries were allowed to like buy from Russia again?
Definitely.
Hmm. So that would help the
But
market.
we don't know how long that embargo is going to be. Like, I think some of that is like, if there's a new leader, I think that's part of like the settlement, just like helping the overall economy. But like, yeah, I think you're correct. The prices of that would come down.
Mhm.
But yeah, like that all like rests on how much we're happy, like how much we're happy with the next leader. Or like, I think the chances of that are reduced. Like, I think there will be ongoing punishment to Putin, even if he does settle. But I think maybe in a year or two, we'll start buying stuff, maybe gradually. Um, but yeah, I think if it's someone new, I think that will new and not crazier. That's really going to help the economy in a variety of ways.
The winner of Musk versus Zuckerberg gets to fight Putin next in the next cage match.
Oh man, I got Putin against either of them. I don't
Yeah.
even care how old he is. Like that, yeah, like
Is there any
yeah.
other
I mean,
macro stuff you wanted to touch on today?
Um, let me think. Uh, well, I did write in my newsletter like Grit Capital. Like I was actually like trying to do, maybe they have like some inside pipe to JP Morgan. Um, but I did see that they were um, quoted as saying, what was it? Uh, I don't want to misquote them. JP Morgan says household excess savings gone by October. That's a pretty big deal. Like, because basically, if that happened, if we're like reaching like a terminal value of that without like, kind of any kind of forecast to like alleviate that, which that sounds pretty definitive. Like, that's something that like, if like basically inflationary pressures stay, like if the job market starts to decline and we're running towards that hill, that could be like that. We keep talking about a credit crisis. That could be the credit crisis right there, as well as like college loans starting to kick in addition to that, like, yeah, that could be like basically anything other than like these big tech companies that I think will like weather it, or like anything that touches AI pretty well that I think will weather it just fine. I think that's going to hit pretty much every other business.
Anything that's discretionary, right? At all?
Yeah. Yeah. Anything that's discretionary, but like even something that we talk about, like, Amazon straddles that, be it where it's just like, and that's right back to like this, like Monopoly, like all the stuff, like, yeah, obviously like all the little stuff that people buy on Amazon, like it touches that.
Mhm.
But it doesn't really touch, like it doesn't really touch like AWS, which will still be like a growing business.
Yep, we'll see how it all plays out. I think the student loans are going to have more of an impact than people think right now.
Me too. All right. I think we can check for questions. We never, seem to have. I guess it must be because we like answer everything so well.
We cover
Um,
everything in finance and the stock market so well.
but yeah, yeah, we've got some watchers to the end. Thanks. But yeah, I think that'll probably do it. Thanks, everyone.
Yep, thanks for watching, everybody. We'll be back next week and we'll have more